Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a special edition of our World News program where the Russian and Ukrainian escalated tensions will dominate. And we start with Russia launching military operations, notably in Kiev, where donations were heard. And the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed Ukrainians in a video. President Volodymyr Zelensky said that Russia had carried out missile strikes on Ukrainian infrastructure and the country's border guards.
This morning, dear citizens, this morning has gone down in history. But this history is different, both for our country and for Russia. We have broken off diplomatic relations with Russia. Ukraine is defending itself and will not give up its freedom, no matter what Moscow thinks. For Ukrainians, independence and the right to live on their land according to their will are of the highest value.
And to talk more about these latest insights, I'm joined live via Skype by Hamoud Saleh, Associate Dean Professor from the United States. Well, thank you for joining us, Hamoud. In the beginning, I would like to ask that President Putin is still insisting that he's not intending to cause any harm. What can we call what happened this morning? Once again, if you can hear me, Hamoud Saleh from the United States, it says here that President Vladimir Putin has just said that he is not intending to cause any harm. What can we call what happened this morning? A no harm, maybe?
I think we are playing on the, again, on the propaganda war. President Putin has his strategic goal. He's looking at ways of how to protect Russian national interest. And he's making that statement in the context of not dragging other forces against his plan to protect Russia's national interest. This is part of the language. We've been here before, be it in 2014, be it in 2008. We've seen it also with the Iraq War in 2003. So it's part of that language.
That's cool. Now, what is Ukraine's stand on this, and how can this affect world's peace and security, according to you, Hamoud?
I think we're moving towards some kind of a status quo. In other words, what the Russians are doing, they felt insecure with a Ukrainian government that is not allied. It reminded them of what they call a coup d'etat back in 2013, when demonstrators went against the pro-Russian president at the time, who refused to sign the partnership with the European Union. We are back into that position where the Russians feel that they have to have somebody in the Ukraine who values, who shares views that Russia or having NATO or certain kind of partnership with the EU is a threat, are a threat to their national interest. So from that perspective, once Russia establishes itself and find some kind of a buffer zone, then I think that's where we are going to see a difference. So what is seen in the past is that you have a move to take control of the areas that they have in mind. The second thing is establish a pro-government or a government that would protect their interests. And then we shift into a status quo. For the European and the United States, again, there are sanctions, there are threats by using force. There is talk about using NATO if Russia moves to areas where there are partners of NATO. So we move in more towards an escalation. Eventually, will lead to a stagnation.
Hamoud Sarhi, before we wrap up with you, as a final question here, you are saying that Russia is feeling quite insecure. Do you think that Russia is going to risk it this much as it did this morning and just bring around itself all the world reaction this way and even putting itself under the threat of world economic sanctions? Is it this, what can we call as insecurity?
I think it's a risk they are taking, but what they did is they calculated that this is a good time for them. In other words, they are very conscious that the pandemic, that the sanctions will have a negative impact, not just on them, will affect them, but also on the Europeans and the Americans. Take, for example, the oil prices. The oil prices are already up. The United States is now in a very difficult position, having to address high inflation, high oil prices, and that impact on the American president, particularly with the elections coming up in 2022. Add to that what's happening in France. You have elections. You have also the whole Brexit in Britain. So they feel they can endure some of the consequences, and as long as there are also repercussions on the European, they see this as sort of a good opportune time for them, and this is how they orchestrated to protect what they see themselves as under threat of the United States and the Europeans.
Thank you so much, Hamoud Sarhi, Associate Dean Professor. You joined us live from the United States for these latest insights regarding the Russian-Ukrainian tensions. And now we're moving on to the same file. And at the second emergency session of the UN Security Council, in 3 days, Council members implored Russia to back down on Ukraine as Vladimir Putin made an unexpected address to Russia television, announcing that he had decided on a military operation. UN Secretary General called on President Vladimir Putin to bring his troops back to Russia in the name of humanity. Let's have a listen.
So in the present circumstances, I must change my appeal. And I must say, President Putin, in the name of humanity, bring your troops back to Russia. In the name of humanity, do not allow to start in Europe what could be the worst war since the beginning of the century, with consequences.
NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg responded to Russian invasion of Ukraine, stating that peace has been shattered on their continent, and he added that NATO has increased its troop presence on its eastern boundary in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Let's have a listen.
We now have war in Europe on a scale and of a type we thought belonged to history. This is a grave moment for the security of Europe. Russia's unjustified and unprovoked attack on Ukraine is putting countless innocent lives at risk. With air and missile attacks, ground forces and special forces from multiple directions, targeting military infrastructure and major urban centers.
And now let's have a look to the world's top leaders' reactions to this military operation taking place in Ukraine by Russian forces.
For all his bombs and tanks and missiles, I don't believe that the Russian dictator will ever subdue the national feeling of the Ukrainians and their passionate belief that their country should be free.
Nous avions anticipé ensemble cette crise.
We had anticipated this crisis together by conducting a demanding dialogue, and alongside our allies and European partners, we have done everything to avoid it. It is there, and we are ready. To this act of war, we will respond without weakness, with cold blood, determination and unity.
Détermination et unité.
This 24th of February is a terrible day for Ukraine and a dark day for Europe. By attacking Ukraine, Russian President Vladimir Putin is once again blatantly breaking international law.
We hope that all parties concerned will not close the door of peace, remain committed to the dialogue, consultation and negotiation.
Transmitimos un mensaje claro.
We send a clear message to the Russian government that we demand an immediate end to the hostilities
A las hostilidades
and withdraw the recognition of the independence of the territories of another sovereign nation, Ukraine.
en este caso de Ucrania.
We are now progressing the second phase of those financial sanctions. The Acting Minister of Foreign Affairs, Senator Birmingham, has completed the process of applying sanctions to an additional 25 persons.
Hungary's position is clear. We stand with Ukraine. We stand with the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. Naturally, even today, Hungary will participate in all kinds of discussions with our allies, which aim to decide on a coordinated response and reaction.
The Ministry of Interior is preparing the need to welcome refugees to Finland. The concern is shared by all. We may observe a significant number of refugees arriving from Ukraine. Today opens a dark new chapter in the European history. Russia has invaded the European country and is threatening a democratic government elected by the Ukrainian people.
And in view of the dangerous security developments taking place in Ukraine and the declaration of martial law, the Algerian embassy in Ukraine calls on all male and female citizens to be watchful and to abide by the instructions given by the Ukrainian authorities. On the other hand, the European meeting held an emergency meeting to react to the Russian incursion to Ukraine.
Early this morning, Russian troops invaded Ukraine, a free and sovereign country. And once again, in the center of Europe, innocent women, men and children are dying of fear for their lives. We condemn this barbaric attack and the cynical arguments to justify it. It is President Putin who is bringing war back to Europe. And in these dark hours, the European Union and its people stand by Ukraine and its people.
Ukraine's leadership said at least 40 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed and at least several dozen wounded in what it called a full-scale war targeting the country from the east, north and south. Russia has launched incursion of Ukraine after President Vladimir Putin ordered a special military operation.
These are among the darkest hours for Europe since the end of World War II. A major nuclear power has attacked a neighbor country and is threatening reprisals of any other state that may come to its rescue. This is not only the greatest violation of international law, it's a violation of the basic principles of human coexistence. It's costing many lives with unknown consequences ahead of us. The European Union will respond in the strongest possible terms.
Many Ukrainians started fleeing to Poland after Russia launched an incursion. Officials in European Union countries bordering Ukraine, including Romania, Slovakia, said there was no big influx of refugees for now, but local media and witnesses said foot traffic was increasing. In his face-to-face meeting since the launch of a special military operation in eastern Ukraine, President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, received Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan in the Kremlin today, Thursday. The two presidents are intended to discuss a wide range of bilateral networks, including energy, cooperation, as well as share their perspectives on significant regional and international challenges. The European Union and others promised unprecedented sanctions to hit the Kremlin as European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen called it a barbaric attack on an independent nation that also targeted stability in Europe and the whole of the international peace order. The EU will hold an emergency summit in Brussels, where NATO is also meeting after Poland and the Baltic nations bordering Russia and Ukraine called for an urgent session.
We will weaken Russia's economic base and its capacity to modernize. And in addition, we will freeze Russian assets in the European Union and stop the access of Russian banks to European financial markets.
And despite the bonding ties between the two countries, here talking about Russia and Ukraine, socially and culturally, why Russia wants to conduct its military operation and takes control of the former Soviet country, why Ukraine seeks membership in the NATO, and what is Russia's response over this? Islam Seed may bring some answers to these questions in this report.
This is the world was expecting to come. Russia has launched a massive military operation over Ukraine. Why does Russia insist to deploy its peacekeeping mission in the neighboring country, overlooking all economic sanctions by the West and the EU? Ukraine and the NATO. Tensions between the two countries has been escalating since yesteryear, when Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky asked for a NATO membership in January of last year. Russia's reaction to Ukraine's request, and the West is threatening. The act couldn't be ignored by Russia, which started sending troops for military drills near Ukraine borders. Since then, the West has threatened Russia with heavy economic sanctions if Russia started any military operations over Ukraine. Russia has demanded legally guarantees from the NATO that it will not come any further eastwards. Tensions roots regarding 2014 Crimea conflict. This isn't the first time that tensions have risen between Russia and Ukraine. In 2014, pro-Russian separatists took control of a large swath of eastern Ukraine and has been fighting the Ukrainian army ever since. At that time, Russia had annexed Crimea. Ukraine and Russia ties and the Minsk Agreement. Russia and Ukraine have historical ties, but those relations have deteriorated since Russia's incursion in 2014. The Minsk Peace Agreement was signed by Russia and Ukraine to end the armed conflict in the east, including the Donbas region. However, as the conflict continues, Russia has said it will send peacekeepers to the region to keep control of the area.
After Moscow launched a full-scale invasion of neighboring Ukraine, Russia's stock market fell at a record-breaking speed and the ruble fell. On Thursday, the MOEX index dropped 45% before recovering to a 34% loss as the ruble hit a new low against the dollar. Western countries started this week imposing economic sanctions against Russia. The toughest sanctions against Moscow, which officials said would target Russia, UK-based oligarchs, tech exports and sovereign debt. Let's follow this report by Nabil Khazini.
After all the diplomatic efforts failed to stop the war, the West now put some of its economic cards on the table as a response to Russia's incursion of Ukraine. The US, the European Union, Japan and the UK unveiled a range of economic and financial sanctions against Russia. The sanctions target different areas, hitting specific financial institutions, Russia's capacity to raise sovereign debt on international markets, as well as several individuals. The European Union agreed to impose sanctions targeting 351 members of the Russian parliament, as well as 27 individuals and entities. The EU says are undermining Ukraine's sovereignty. The UK has announced a series of sanctions against Moscow. 5 banks have had their assets frozen, along with 3 Russian billionaires, who will also be hit with UK travel bans.
This is the first tranche, the first barrage of what we are prepared to do. And we hold further sanctions at readiness to be deployed alongside the United States and the European Union if the situation escalates still further.
The United States sanctioned VEB and PSB, which is a Russian military bank. The sanctions aim to freeze their assets in the country and will block US businesses from conducting transactions with them.
We're implementing full blocking sanctions on 2 large Russian financial institutions, VEB and their military bank. We're implementing comprehensive sanctions on Russian sovereign debt, That means we've cut off Russia's government from Western financing. It can no longer raise money from the West and cannot trade in its new debt on our markets or European markets either.
Nord Stream 2, which represents 50% of Germany's annual consumption and could be worth as much as $15 billion to the Russian state-owned company Gazprom, Germany has indefinitely postponed the certification of the controversial pipeline, a move which targets Russia's huge energy industry.
And for more world economic news, let's follow these summaries by Sofiane Kintori.
The prices of Bitcoin fell below $35,000 early Thursday after Russian President Vladimir Putin announced a military operation on the Donbas region of Ukraine. Brent crude oil hit $104 a barrel and stock futures fell sharply late Wednesday after blasts were heard in Ukraine and Russia President Vladimir Putin announced a military operation on Donbas. Gold is witnessing the highest rise in more than a year on global stock exchanges, which reached a rise of $35 Thursday morning after Russia military operation on Ukraine. As Vladimir Putin ties with the West worsen and Moscow is slammed by escalating sanctions over the Ukraine issue, China is poised to provide Russia an economic lifeline. Russian military operation on Ukraine is having global and domestic economic consequences, raising uncertainty, rattling commodities markets, and potentially driving up inflation as gas and food prices increase throughout the world.
And finally, Algerian President Abdelmajid Tebboune wrote a letter in an address read on his behalf by Prime Minister Ayman Ben Abdelrahman on the occasion of the festivities commemorating the 66th anniversary of the creation of the General Union of Algerian Workers and the 51st anniversary of the nationalization of hydrocarbons in Hassim Saud. The president emphasized that Algeria could be an important piece in the hydrogen field.
The 24th of February is an important day for Algerians. It is the anniversary of the creation of the General Union of Algerian Workers, which is created in 1956, and the nationalization of hydrocarbons in 1971. When we stand proud in this important day, it shows our loyalty and the spirit of sacrifice, and we show that our first principle is the freedom.
That's all for this special edition. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.